at least since I've been here. Because we had so much interest in this, we are recording this webinar as well. So just as an FYI for folks. And so we know how important these proposals are to members of our community. I myself am on my local zoning board. I know here with us tonight, we have zoning officials, planning officials, we have elected officials, and we have some special guests as well that I'll be introducing in just one moment. So here at New Jersey LCV, we're concerned with the community and environmental impacts of warehouse sprawl, right? Questions about stormwater management, air quality from increased truck traffic, loss of farmland and open space, and environmental justice issues. So we do plan to host several more webinars in the future on specific topics on warehouses. So please stay tuned to learn more. We'll be letting you know how you can follow along later on in the presentation and how you can learn more about what we're doing. But we're thrilled tonight to be joined by some special guests from the New Jersey Department of State to kick off the educational forum of tonight's presentation. And so before we move into more of our advocacy portion, the Department of State's Office of Planning Advocacy has joined us tonight to take the time to educate us on their warehouse siting guidance. But just before I introduce our featured speaker, I'd like to take a moment to thank our co-sponsors for tonight's event, including New Jersey Future, the Association of New Jersey Environmental Commissions, the New Jersey Highlands Coalition, the Pinelands Preservation Alliance, Camden Community Partnership, Food and Water Watch, the Atlantic Climate Justice Alliance, and the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. So as I stated, we're going to have two parts this evening. And first, we're going to begin with a presentation from Donna Rendeiro. Donna is the Executive Director of the New Jersey State Planning Commission and the Office of Planning Advocacy in the Department of State. And she is also joined by Matt Blake of the Office of Planning Advocacy. In June of last year, OPA put out guidance on best practices for warehouse siting and considerations for communities as they look at zoning, master planning, and warehouse applications. And again, I just want to be clear that while many of us have opinions about warehouses this evening, as a state agency, Donna's office is more neutral on the topic of warehouses in general, but they've graciously agreed to share their knowledge and background information with us and answer some clarifying questions about the guidance before we move into the advocacy portion of the evening. After Donna's presentation and some questions with her and Matt, we're going to take a minute to survey you all and learn more about your experiences with warehouses in your communities. And then we'll move into the second part of our program where we're going to hear from an activist, Brett Anderson, about a grassroots effort in opposition to a warehouse proposal in Chesterfield. And then finally, we'll hear from all of you again on what you think we should be doing next for future warehouse advocacy efforts. So we're so grateful that you could all join us for this educational and productive evening. Some quick ground rules. We just ask that, again, please mute your mic, that you have your camera off if you're not speaking or asking a question, that you're respectful when commenting or asking questions in the chat. Throughout the presentations this evening, we ask that you put your questions and comments in the chat, and then we will get to them as we get to the Q&A portions. But we do have staff monitoring the chat, so please feel free to put those questions in as we go. We would love for you to also identify where you're from. If you have a specific town role in your town, if you're on a local planning or zoning board, feel free to let us know that in the chat as well. So thank you so much, and we're going to get started with the first portion of the evening. So again, we want to thank Donna Rendeiro and Matt Blake for graciously volunteering their time this evening. Donna was named Executive Director and Secretary of the State Planning Commission and the Executive Director of the Office of Planning Advocacy within the Department of State in July 2019. Previously, she served as Chief of Administration for the New Jersey Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency, as well as its Chief of Staff. She also oversaw New Jersey's homeless management information system managed through HMFA. Donna was the Director of Community Planning at the New Jersey Redevelopment Authority, Acting Executive Director of the Office of Smart Growth, and Brownfield's Policy Director. She has worked with the Governor's Office of Economic Growth on urban policy, and previous experience includes redevelopment and shared services at the municipal and county levels. Donna is a former vice president at Citibank as chief of staff to the senior credit officer in the credit card division, and she was a branch manager. She has a Bachelor of Science in Marketing from Pace University. And I am going to turn it over to Donna. And I know we have some questions about sharing afterwards, and we will let everyone who's registered know afterwards how they can access this information. Thank you. And I will turn it over to Donna.
Thank you, Allison. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for hearing us out. I am Donna Rendeiro. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Planning Advocacy in the State Planning Commission. With me today is Matt Blake. He's a senior planner in our office, and he was the primary author of this document that everyone is very interested in. So we're going to run through the slides. This is I think 8th or 9th presentation. We have a couple more to go. We've had a wide variety of audiences. This presentation is pretty much directed toward municipal officials, but it could be acclimated to any audience. I'm going to just give you a brief overview. Matt's going to talk a little bit about some of the details in the guidance, and then I'm going to bring it home with our next steps. So as some of you know, some of you don't know, that our Office of Planning Advocacy is within the Business Action Center in the Department of State, and we are the administrative support to the State Planning Commission. We coordinate state planning, we implement the goals of the State Development and Redevelopment Plan, and we integrate state planning priorities with a number of our state agency partners. We are not regulatory, though, and it's important to understand that. We can provide technical assistance, we could provide guidance, but we are not a regulatory agency, and so we cannot institute regulations. We do not have that authority. So logistics in New Jersey is extremely important. One of the messages we want to give here is that we are not against warehouse development. We do believe, though, that warehouse siting should be right-sized and rightly placed. The logistics industry is about 12% of New Jersey's jobs. So we do think it's really important that we pay attention to the logistics industry and the warehouses. But what we are trying to do with this document is we are trying to ensure that it's placed properly with the right types of planning tools in place and with the right players at the table. So it's a balancing act, just like everything else we do at the State Planning Commission. We have to balance numerous different first priorities. One really quick example of this is I was giving this presentation, or we were talking about this at a State Planning Commission meeting, and I kept referring to New Jersey as the logistics state. And a member of the public came up and said, I beg to differ with you. We are the Garden State. And that kind of says it all, because because of our location, we are a logistics state. There's no getting around that. But we also need to pay absolute deference to the fact that we are the Garden State, and we need to balance those factors. So what you see here is the state plan policy map. And what you see in magenta and pinks are the urbanized areas. And, we've been doing a state plan map since about 1930, so almost 100 years, and the map looks very similar. There are some tweaks and there are some changes, but the map looks very similar to the map that we had done in 1930. I call this the state plan sash. You see the urbanized areas, and they go from Northeast, Trenton, Newark, and Newark, Jersey City, in that area, down Southwest towards Camden and into Trenton. We believe that there are concerns on both in the urban areas for environmental justice issues, but also in farmland and the need to protect our open spaces and preserve spaces. So there are warehouse issues in both types of communities, but for different reasons. Traditionally, most warehouses were sited in urban cores near ports and interchanges, but that trend, as we all know, over the last 10 years has migrated towards farmland. It's cheaper to develop there. It's easier for a developer to put something in an area that has not previously been developed. So this guidance tries to balance that. Just very quickly, we created this guidance because many municipalities, many counties, many members of the public asked us to do it. We had a huge amount of public input, and in September of 2022, the State Planning Commission adopted this guidance. A disclaimer for our municipal friends that are here, please consult with your land use attorneys to ensure that the land use decisions are consistent with the municipal land use law and local goals and priorities. Every municipality interprets the MLUL slightly differently, and we just want to make sure it's consistent. We are not land use attorneys. So an important disclaimer is make sure your land use attorney is part of this discussion. So now I'm going to hand it over to Matt to go through some of the details. Matt, you're up.
Thank you, Donna, and good evening, everybody. So this slide just sort of depicts the public process. Of course, not unsurprisingly, we had an overwhelming amount of comments. Many were in favor of the Office of Planning Advocacy, the counties, regional planning agencies taking a more proactive review of warehouse development, particularly for those projects that have a regional impact. So no surprises there. Donna mentioned that and the reality is that the State Planning Commission doesn't have a jurisdiction to make those sort of decisions at the local level. So just in a nutshell, our guidance, we want to be, what we're trying to encourage is a more proactive rather than reactive approach. What we say at our local planning board level is, once the ball is in play, if you have an application coming before you and it's a permitted use, it's really too late at that stage to say no to a project. So all of this tries to distill various factors for municipalities to consider. Not every factor or consideration is going to be a good fit for that community. So, we're asking towns to take a more holistic approach. Some are going to pick and choose, right? Because every town is different. And certainly, given that because, these larger projects, they're not, particularly the massive projects, they're not benign uses, right? Typically we look at a land use, we look at the impacts at the site, but because of the traffic generation, because of the semi-tractor trailers and the air pollution impacts that they convey, this is the type of land use that can extend its impacts well beyond the municipal borders. And for that reason, we are strongly encouraging, greater intermunicipal and regional coordination. So you'll hear more about that. And in white, you just see ticking off the list of the basic component chapters of the document. Next slide, please. So let's just jump in real quick into some definitions for types of warehouses. There's a lot out there. You don't have to follow ours, but we thought these were helpful in terms of folks understanding. According to the Geography of Transport Systems, warehouses are essentially freight facilities used to support freight transportation and distribution systems. They come in many forms, sizes, and intensities. In fact, that's part of the problem because many municipal ordinances are really looking at just the type of long-term storage warehouse facilities that many of us grew up with. And their ordinances are just woefully unprepared for the sheer scale and intensity of the warehouses that we see today. So in this list, you've got your manufacturing facilities. So you have assemblage, package, labeling, materials of goods for freight inputs and outputs. Terminal facilities are involved in the transfer or transloading of cargo from one mode to another, mode being air, land, water, vice versa. Materials coming into the ports being rapidly transferred within 1 to 7 days. These tend to be really your massive projects, 500,000 square feet or greater, which want to be closer to the port. They're serving really an interstate use and regional. Storage facilities, this is really your traditional sort of long-term storage facility that would hold materials for longer periods and then let them go on demand. What we're really focused on here, what tends to be the big issue are the distribution facilities, which they hold materials temporarily. So you've got large, incredible high volumes of materials coming in and going out to the markets that they serve, whether they're serving a regional market or at the smaller scale at lower intensities. These are going to be your parcel facilities, which are also a form of a distribution facility, but more typically affiliated with your last mile facilities that actually might work well in the context of a strip mall and could be substantially smaller. Next slide, please. So types of warehouses, again, we talk about the traditional warehouses, We tend to be less concerned about the traditional uses. They exist in many industrial parks all around New Jersey, and didn't really get much attention until the advent of the distribution warehouse system facilities, because they're so much larger and they generate so much traffic. And really, it has everything to do with the flow velocity, and just today's expectations of getting your package delivered within 24 hours, and that's not changing. So following recent updates to the trip generation model, the Institute of Traffic Engineers, they actually list 6 different categories, warehouse definitions. This is important because, if you just have a generic definition for warehouses, you may not know or have much control when an applicant comes before your town that, this is the right type of project for your community. Everybody, whether it's your planning board, the citizenry, or the applicant, folks need to be speaking the same language so they can make informed based decisions. For simplicity case, we've aggregated these into 3 major types, and that's the distribution facilities, the last mile fulfillment centers, or stations. Next slide. All right, so with warehousing types, size really does matter. And I think as Donna opened, you could have one of the best locations ever. You could be right, a nice road with great capacity. It could be right next to a major highway interchange. But if it's out of scale, if the road's not right because its level of service has received a failing grade, it really doesn't matter how good that site is. If your scale and intensity just completely overwhelms the immediate area and perhaps the surrounding community. So this is how we break these up in terms of size and intensity. Municipalities will do this differently, but for your major distribution centers, which would include the terminal facilities that serve interstate, or this is more of a regional audience. So these are places that may be serving customers as far away as 90 miles. And they typically range from a gross square floor area of 500 to 1 million square feet. And by the way, it goes much beyond that. You may have one project with 3 or 5 buildings that could be over 4 million square feet. So these things get big really quickly. Then you have your large fulfillment centers, which are serving more regional markets, typically want to be within 10 miles of the turnpike interchange. So that's one of the issues why we have this issue with warehouse sprawl, because as much as we want them as close to the highways as we can, many of them can successfully locate much further out into more rural areas. And they typically range from 150 to 500,000 square feet. There's a mid-range there, which ranges from 250 to 350,000 square feet. And then your last mile facilities, which are really serving your area market, your neighborhoods, much more of a local animal. They come in different shapes and sizes too, of course, and they range from anywhere from 50,000 to 150,000 square feet. They could include micro or small fulfillment centers. So, something that was really serving the same purpose as a retail store, about the size of a small post office. And, these generally don't, entail, large amounts of, heavy diesel powered tractor trailers. Certainly, they can entail a lot of delivery vans. So, you always want to be concerned about traffic, but this is a very different animal if you compare it against your major distribution. And then high cube, I won't spend too much on that. These are really your superstructures that, typically these buildings today, they're about 3 stories, 37 linear feet. What we're talking about is a type of structure that we're seeing more out in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania. If you go down 80 or 78, you'll see these massive superstructures that can be up and above 10 stories tall, rising above the landscape. And, on the one hand, they're good because, you could preserve a lot more open space, right, to treat stormwater, protect habitat. So their footprint on the land at the site may be much less. But you have to remember what these buildings entail as part of the shell. They Part of that includes a high-speed racking system. So they're extremely mechanized buildings. And so they're moving product in and out at super rapid speeds. They may have less employees because it's a much more automated animal, but you have to ask yourself whether or not, your municipality, particularly if you're more rural suburban, if you have the EMS and fire suppression support capacity to deal with something like this if there's a problem. So this is something you have to sort of weigh the positives and negatives. That's not to say that a high cube warehouse can't find appropriate locations. There certainly are instances where this might be the right type of project if it has a good location. Next slide.
Matt, we're going to have to start talking about the factors a little bit quickly because we don't have more than about 10 more minutes.
All right, so we say this over and over. We'll only say it once tonight, but you want to update your master plan and zoning first, right? Your ordinances are really built and defensible based on what your master plan is. If you haven't, typically in New Jersey, you've got to update your master plan or do a re-exam every 10 years. But if you're experiencing or anticipating warehouse development, you may not wait, and you may not want to wait, and it probably isn't prudent to wait another 5 years to get to that. And if you're really seeing big projects, then probably a more comprehensive update to your master plan is going to be warranted. Next slide, please. So of course, we're always trying to encourage communities that we work with to to develop in a more compact center-based form. We really don't want to see these things spread out. That's kind of the whole point of sprawl. So good planning, putting your industrial zoning districts proximate to state highways or freight designated freight highways. Some of the really important factors that are that are echoed in the policies that were adopted as part of the guidance is, of course, we want towns to craft ordinances that avoid aquatic resources, flood hazard zones, wetlands, riparian areas, etc. We want to avoid important agricultural resources identified at the local, county, and state area. We want to protect our primary soils. We don't want to put these, if you have a plan and it has a map that you're going to preserve all these farms within a certain boundary, well, of course, we would discourage zoning that would then open those areas up for large scale warehousing development. And of course, we want to be concerned about sensitive receptors like overburdened communities, schools, daycare centers, intensive residential areas, not appropriate to site large scale warehouses next to or adjacent to those areas. The impact analysis, this is something that we require a developer to do. Every town has a different impact analysis that they require. It's not as uniform as you might think it would be. But you want to have this stuff spelled out so your board can require a developer to look at land use, traffic, employee routes, transportation, supporting infrastructure, sensitive receptors, environmental resources, impacts to the road network, improvements that are going to be necessitated by the added traffic volume and weight. You're going to want to do either ask the developer or you can actually do as part of your master plan to do a cost benefit analysis, because a lot of times we chase the ratables, really looking at the shiny object of all the revenues without really considering what the long-term municipal services are going to impact. What happens when that warehouse goes away? Is it really cost effective? Very important questions to making an informed decision. And that'll help ensure that we don't mistakenly focus on projected job creation and then wind out with something that really harms our municipality long term. Next. Special exceptions and conditional uses. So like I said earlier, these large scale warehouses are not benign uses, particularly because those impacts with mobile traffic and diesel truck traffic get exported offsite. Some municipalities have cited these projects at their municipal boundaries, exporting those impacts onto adjacent towns. And that's not good. That's not neighborly. That's not good planning. So one thing we encourage, rather than allowing these uses by right, and of course it's important to accommodate a variety of land uses in our zoning, you still have the right to make them a conditional use. And you might look at certain parameters like, landscaping, your bulk standards, different than what would otherwise be required for different uses that are less intensive. And you may look at whether or not you want to permit certain projects of a scale. Not every community is going to be appropriate for a warehouse that's over 350 to 500 to 1 million square feet. You don't have to allow that. Next slide, please. And another really powerful tool that hopefully every municipality is aware of is the New Jersey Local Redevelopment and Housing Law. It gives municipalities powerful tools to negotiate, to do redevelopment designations and plans, to partner with the developer to get better outcomes, better performance standards, to direct revenues to making certain public improvements to, let's say, the roadway network or other offsite impacts or necessary infrastructure. A lot of these are tools in the toolkit that aren't otherwise available under the municipal land use law. And it really does put the municipality in the driver's seat. So important to become familiar with. Transportation, traffic, and road safety planning, very important, really fundamentally key to all of this. Obviously, truck traffic can present substantial safety issues for a wide variety of reasons. And it's really important that, for a project like this, that you have a really good checklist of what you're going to be asking that developer on his or her dime to conduct as far as a traffic impact study. Not every impact study is created equal. You want to look and see what other municipalities are doing, because again, this is a very different type of land use. Sustainable design. That's kind of the buzzword today. I mean, you just look at the enormity of rooftops. Wouldn't it be great to encourage greater use of solar panels? We want to be concerned about the berming, your landscaping, and the fact that these projects can have such dominating structural features, right? They have nuisances that they engender, and how we deal with addressing noise, dust, odors, and visual impacts, and really important design standards, that helps these projects fit into the context of the surrounding area and the community, your architectural elements and features. Next slide, please. Community engagement, really, really important. This is something that needs to happen at the beginning of the process. I'm on a planning board, and I can't tell you how many times in the public portion do we hear members of the public come up and bring something to our attention that neither we or the developer had ever thought of. That's really important. The sooner you do that, the sooner you save time and money and headache for all involved. And in the regional approach, again, if impacts are regional, then planning should be as well. And given the undeniable importance of warehousing, as well as the undeniable significance of the types of impacts that we're seeing, given the rapid proliferation of warehouses, it's really important that communities start working together, talking to each other, notifying each other when a project comes, partnering with their county, a real untapped resource on doing things like targeted corridor planning studies, so that when the project does come, we know what to ask of the developer in terms of their proportionate contribution to fix the road. Next slide. County subdivision and site plan. So the county has an important role to play, albeit it's somewhat limited. That's the County Planning Act. So after a project gets reviewed at the local level, it goes before the county. And in those instances where you have a project that's affecting county roads, facilities, drainages, etc., in certain circumstances, in those incidents, the county can require a developer to contribute to the proportionate share for an infrastructure improvement, such as to a road widening or a drainage facility that's been necessitated by the development. Next slide. Establish technical advisory committees under a regional approach. County, regional planning agencies can, with the assistance and support of their constituent municipalities, establish a TAC. Appropriate state agencies could be encouraged to participate. This is something that you could establish with your partners as part of conducting a master plan, a corridor study, or a way to solicit really good feedback from your neighbors, your experts, your county, your regional entity when a major project comes to the town as part of an application. Next slide, please.
So what's next, really quickly? We are working on a model warehouse ordinance. We are also working when the very beginning discussions of a mapping process to not only map what has been approved and built, but also where it is recommended, where larger sized warehouses should be located. We are continuing to share this presentation with anybody who would listen. We have spoken to a number of different audiences, and we look forward to your input. If you have any comments, we will at some point probably update this. This was an important learning tool for us, but at some point in the hopefully not too distant future, we will update it. But we've had generally really good feedback from a lot of variety of folks in terms of the quality of and what's in this document. Where it differs is that some people feel it should be legislated, others do not. I don't have to tell which audience suggests that to be legislated, others do not. It's above my pay grade to decide whether it should be. There are several bills in the legislature now that are being considered that are direct result of this guidance. But our hope is that municipalities will voluntarily utilize this guidance so that we don't need legislation. And so I'll leave it at that. And we went through them really, really quickly. This slide's really, really quickly, but we could talk for hours on this. So I'm going to hand it back over to Allison to, I guess, do Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much, Donna. We're going to keep the two of you spotlighted, Matt and Donna, if that's all right with you. And we see a ton of questions coming into the chat. Again, please keep those coming. And it might be, like I said in the beginning, we're going to be doing some advocacy work after they leave as well. So if we don't get to your question for this audience, there's definitely more time later. But starting with some of the questions that we've seen is we see a lot of folks saying, what can the average person do with this guidance? How can they get it in front of the people that need to see it? What can they do? How do they find out about these kind of proposals? So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your process and how you think the average people on this webinar can use this guidance and can really get it implemented.
So we all know that land use, 99% of the land use decisions are locally driven. I think maybe to start the conversation with your planning boards, your local elected officials, ahead of time before a project is at your desk. Have these discussions. One of the things Matt talked about is being proactive in updating your master plans and zoning ordinances, and maybe at that point, before it becomes an emergent or an emergency situation where the application is in front of you, start those conversations earlier on. And then maybe you can get that discussion moving.
And find out when your master plan was last updated. And if it's been, more than 5 years, then there might be a very good chance that your zoning ordinances may be ill-equipped to handle the types of warehouses that distribution warehousing needs today in New Jersey.
Thank you both so much. I think you bring up a really great point. So I just want to let folks know as well that, so I'm on my local zoning board here. I know a lot of folks are on their environmental commission, their planning board, their zoning board. Those are all public meetings. So I think it's important for folks to figure out what's happening in your town. You can go to your zoning board, you can go to your planning board, as Donna and Matt said, before something becomes an issue, and figure out, are we prepared for this now, right? A lot of the guidance talked about timing, looking at your ordinances. Donna, you talked a little bit about a draft ordinance that you all are working on to get in front of town. So I would, advocate for folks to get involved at the local level also already. The other thing that and again, I see some hands, but if you could just put the questions in the chat, just due to the volume of folks that we have on tonight, it's just going to be a little bit easier for us to manage them that way. Another question is, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, you said you were going to be updating this again, but kind of the public process that you go through and how folks can get feedback to OPA or how they can access this information. What other resources in addition to your guidance can folks take a look at? Well,
one of the things I was going to ask you is if you could send us all of these comments. Between the presentations that we have given, the public process that we went through when we developed the guidance, and the fact that we're now watching every newspaper article, we're seeing it all. We believe we understand what the challenge is, but it's always good to get more input from a variety of different partners. We still have the email open. That's warehouses@sos.nj.gov. You can feel free to send comments that way. We probably will not be immediately updating it, but it's always important for us in our advocacy role to understand what people are thinking. I got to tell you, we have a pretty good idea of what most people are thinking. And this has probably been one of the most attention-getting things that the State Planning Commission has done. And so it's certainly on our radar, very, very, very top priority. Continue to send us comments. We understand what most of your issues are at this point, but as we continue down this road, then we definitely would love to hear if you have additional information.
Yeah, and that runs both ways, right? Because there's always room for improvement. And like if your municipality has just adopted a redevelopment plan that specifically addresses making warehouses I need a copy of that, because all of my ideas come from other people's good ideas, and we want to keep building on that. So, these presentations, we can continue to do them if you have an interested group in your community, your environmental commission, if your town wants to invite us, if you want to meet with us, call me, talk on the phone. We're happy to continue to provide that level of assistance.
Thank you both. And I still see a lot of questions coming in the chat. And I want to let folks know this is not the end of our discussion tonight. And this is not the end of our topic on warehouses. Absolutely not. As we can see, there's a lot of interest here. And there's lots more to talk about in terms of advocacy. But one question, if we could just wrap up with one question we saw. We know we have a whole guidance document and a lot of great information in terms of factors that folks could consider. If you would each just maybe, not to put you on the spot, but if you could pick something that you think folks don't often think about when they're trying to cite the guidance for warehouses, something that you just want to make sure folks think about and look a little more deeply in warehouse citing. If you could just do that. And then I want to let folks know that that link in the chat that we've been posting is a link to the guidance that they're referring to.
I think the most important thing to take out of this is the proactive versus the reactive approach. Be proactive. We all know that once the application has been presented to the governing body, the local governing body, the zoning that's in place at the time of the application is what rules. Don't wait until the 11th hour. Encourage your municipal officials to look at their zoning, and because if their zoning and their master plan hasn't been updated in 15-20 years, the vision for the town might have changed. Make sure that there's a review that makes sure that that vision is what the municipality currently wants. And if not, make those changes ahead of time. If there's one takeaway, do it proactively.
And to just echo what Donna said, I mean, every town has a color-coded zoning map, usually on their website, or you can ask for it. Find out where your light industrial zone is. There may be a variety of similar, zones that allow warehousing. Find out where that zone is. How big is it? Does it make sense today? What led to that becoming a zone? Were they trying to discourage housing at one time because that was the sprawl that was facing New Jersey of yesteryear? What roads bisect that zone? If a project were to happen, how do those semi-tractor trailers get to the first major interchange on a state highway? Those are questions you want to ask. And if your community is bisected by a major state highway, an interchange, even if it hasn't happened yet, you better believe it's coming your way.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you so much for your work, for this guidance, for sharing it with us. Again, we've dropped that in the chat. And I would just ask Donna or Matt, since you're here, if you could just put in the chat one more time that email address as well for folks. And then that way they know how they can continue to contact you. But again, thank you both so much for sharing with us this evening. We really appreciate your insights.
Okay.
Thank
and
you.
we will get this as soon as I can figure out how to get back to everybody.
No.
I will put it in. You keep going and I'll put it in a minute.
Great. Thank you so much, Donna. And thank you to Matt. And thank you to all the great questions in the chat. And so if you could just advance the slide here. We've had an excellent presentation, but what we're going to do now, if people need to stretch, take a quick break, I'll put that a minute. What we're actually going to ask folks do while they take a break is we have a quick survey for you. What we're going to be moving into the next part of our presentation is, and I see Donna just dropped that in the chat. Thank you, Donna. And I see that we're going to be, we want to take a quick survey from you all while we take a quick break, get some coffee, and move into the next part of our presentation, which we're going to be hearing from an activist. So I'm going to ask, I think one of our slides might be missing, so I apologize about that. We have a live survey that we're going to be able to take, and I'm going to ask our folks to drop that in the chat for you. There's a link to a live survey. It's going in the chat right now. If you follow that survey, the link, the questions will come up immediately, and you can follow them and answer, just so we can kind of get an idea of who is on the call, whether there is a warehouse whether a warehouse development currently happening in your community, if this is something that you're actively dealing with. And if you follow that link that you'll see New Jersey LCV just dropped in the chat, I will read it for you. It's POLLEV.com/rightsoul058. That will take you to our live chat so that we can get some more information from folks. And it'll take you to a couple questions on the poll. So if you just want to advance the slide here as well. And you can see the next question. Why do you care about warehouse sprawl, and what are some of your biggest issues? And again, I've seen plenty of feedback from folks in the chat. We are capturing this all as well. I know I saw a lot of requests for copies of the slides. We have notes to ask the Department of State afterwards. We have everybody's information who registered, and we would, if they're comfortable, we'd be happy to share this all with you. So we did see those requests as well. We did link to their actual guidance document, but understanding that folks want to see a copy of the slide. So we'll give it about one more minute if you want to take this poll. And again, that's just information for us. Is that it's not working for you folks? I'm sorry about that. So let's move into the next portion while we're waiting for that. Sorry about that. We have another question at the end, so we'll get that to. We'll make sure that we have that squared away for the end. I was saying to someone, we try to, you always try to do something new. So folks, if you put that in your browser, it should be working. But if not, again, we'll get that squared away while we move into our next presentation. We'll make sure we get that squared away. Okay, so if we can advance to our next slide. It looks like it is working if you do it in your browser. So if you copy paste that link into your browser, we can start to capture that information. Okay, and now we're going to move into the advocacy portion of our evening. And so thanks folks for hanging on. And right now we're going to hear from one of our activists in Chesterfield, New Jersey, named Brett Anderson. Brett is the president of Save Old York, an all-volunteer social welfare nonprofit based out of Chesterfield. He is also the vice president of the Philadelphia Serengeti Alliance, a nonprofit empowering women and girls in rural Tanzania through water and healthcare projects. By day, Brett is a program manager for a software company. We first connected with Brett at an event in Burlington County, where he shared what he and the membership of Save Old York are doing to combat a warehouse proposal in their community. So we wanted to share Brett's experiences, what's happened to him, and what he recommends for folks that are going through this same process. So hopefully this portion will be more about advocacy and sharing learned information. So again, for this portion, please feel free to put any questions in the chat and we will do a Q&A with Brett after his presentation. So I will turn it over to Brett.
Thank you, Allison. I'm just going to start screen sharing here.
No problem.
All right, is that appearing for everyone?
Yes, we can see and hear you fine, Brett.
Great, thank you very much. So I would like to thank the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters and for all of the participants this evening for having me. As mentioned, my name is Brett Anderson. I'm the president of Save Old York, or we refer to it as SOY for short. Together with our vice president, Agnes Marsala, and our secretary, Lori Thier, we have worked over the past few years to champion a cause impactful to our community in Chesterfield and beyond. Save Old York is a 501c4 created in 2021 in response to the announcement of a warehouse project in our town. Together with the SOY Board of Directors, we have been working tirelessly to educate the public on the realities that this project would have on our community and surrounding towns. We have reviewed countless documents and consulted with many professionals to ensure the information we share with the public is as accurate as possible. The initial presentation from the warehouse developer, Active Acquisitions, suggested that a golf course, a banquet hall, and an historically significant home be replaced with a 1.1 million square foot warehouse. The warehouse would bring hundreds of trucks and commuters to our small town. Our town currently consists of approximately 9,000 residents in Burlington County. Although the project has been frequently described as being on quote unquote the edge of town and therefore less disruptive to residents, the property sits on a county road used as an important point of entry and exit for the community. The property is home to wetlands and portions of it sit within an existing flood zone. Blacks Creek, a tributary, runs through the property. It neighbors two preserved farms that are in danger of drainage and flooding issues from the proposed addition of impervious surface and changes to wastewater treatment. Although Chesterfield Township is utilized an area in need of rehabilitation, and I'll touch on that in a little bit as well, although they use the area in need of rehabilitation designation, suggesting existing structures should be rehabilitated, it ultimately adopted a redevelopment plan that does not rehabilitate any structures. Instead, it chose to fully redevelop the property with a zoning change completely unlike the surrounding properties and a unique use not found anywhere else in the township. As one resident put it is one thing to designate a new industrial zone. It is another to put that new industrial zone in someone's backyard. This is important because the bar for area in need of rehabilitation is lower than area in need of redevelopment. Using one to substitute the intent of the other sets a concerning precedent and lowers the bar for rezoning properties across the state. So here is a timeline over the past 3 years highlighting major milestones. In May of 2020, Chesterfield Township worked with the property owner and the warehouse developer to conduct a study of what was the country club. There's a lot of detail in this slide, but the key point is that the area in need of rehabilitation was primarily based upon the criteria of quote unquote environmental contamination. That criteria was selected because of a single DEP water quality violation reported the same month that the rehabilitation report was prepared. Notably, the DEP violation was remediated 1 month after the rehabilitation ordinance was adopted. It is difficult to comprehend how this temporary violation rose to the level of environmental contamination requiring use of the municipal land use law. The fact that these events happened during the beginning of COVID, as I'm seeing a lot of people are commenting that the timing, a lot of this has happened during that period, it meant that there was almost no public attention and no effort to challenge or appeal the rehabilitation decision. In March of 2021, almost a year after the rehabilitation area was designated, the warehouse developer gave a public presentation at a special township meeting held virtually. This was ultimately the first time that we officially heard that this property was being considered for a warehouse. There were many promises made in that presentation, but one of the most interesting claims that was made was that the warehouse would have less of an environmental impact on the property than the golf course. While no commercial use of a property can claim to be antiseptic, this claim was met with serious doubts. 3 months after the developer's presentation to the township, public feedback on the project to the township committee continued to be overwhelmingly negative. In June of that year, the township held a regular meeting and the warehouse project was the main topic of discussion. At that time, the township committee stated that it had doubts about the motivation behind the area needed rehabilitation requested by the property owner, and a majority of the committee said that the warehouse project was not right for Chesterfield. Residents felt that their voices were heard. Soy established a letter writing campaign using the Action Network platform, creating a template for residents to share their concerns over the project. Following this meeting and early successes against the project, the warehouse developer created its own letter writing campaign under a fictitious name and created a marketing campaign called the Chesterfield Improvement Plan. It spent tens of thousands of dollars on mailers and handouts, in addition to hiring an Olympic soccer player to sign autographs at a local harvest festival that year. The following year, it hired an NFL player to sign autographs. As part of the mailer and letter campaign, the developer offered $2 million to improve recreational facilities in the township. From what we could tell, these efforts did not materially impact the public's opinion. However, it made inroads with some of the township committee members and staff. After a relatively quiet 6 months with little movement on the project proposal, some of the same township committee members that said no to the warehouse project the previous year spoke at a regular meeting in May of 2022 about an alleged financial crisis facing the community. The warehouse topic was back on the table, and the new higher tax revenue estimates were touted as justification for approaching the developer to once again hear their offer. Many townships fall into the trap of the rateable chase, a term referenced by New Jersey Future in its municipal tax rate analysis. This rateable chase rarely provides the benefit often promised. In Chesterfield, the only justification provided for changing a property's zoning from agricultural to light industrial was the tax revenue generated by that project, as shown here. In October of 2022, Chesterfield Township adopted the redevelopment plan to rezone the property. Soy hired a professional planner with extensive experience to review the plan prior to its adoption to determine if it was in the best interests of our town. The professional provided testimony, official testimony, to both the planning board and township committee regarding his position that the plan was inconsistent with Chesterfield's master plan, as well as the new State Planning Commission guidelines. These guidelines were issued before the redevelopment plan was adopted. Unfortunately, his testimony was either dismissed or ignored, and the township adopted the plan on October 27th. It was actually in such a rush to adopt the plan that the committee had to introduce amendments to it immediately after adopting it because it contained a number of errors. In the warehouse site plan shown here, copied from the redevelopment plan, the potential impact to wetlands and drainage can be seen. The main building has the largest impact with its 1.1 million square feet, not including the parking and truck bays that would surround the building. Something else that's notable about this site plan is you can see on the upper right-hand side, one preserved farm. What's difficult to see at the lower portion of the image is another preserved farm. And the parking lot on the left is in a different township in Mansfield. So the site plan ultimately is trying to fit in this warehouse in between two preserved farms. The upper section of the site plan shows the driveways for trucks and other vehicles that would add impervious surface that currently exceeds the DEP's allowable limit. The developer and the DEP are currently going back and forth with applications to negotiate that. And the wastewater treatment plant proposed for a location outside of the property's currently approved sewer service area, approved sewer service area, because they currently use septic, and they're proposing adding a new wastewater treatment plant on the property. That would require a large disposal field and could impact the drainage for both of those neighboring farms. Following the adoption of the redevelopment plan, Soy and some of the neighbors of the proposed warehouse site chose to file an appeal with the New Jersey Superior Court in Burlington County. That case is now pending, and it has important repercussions for other municipalities, warehouse developers, and the residents who will be impacted by such projects. Although our organization's primary goal is social welfare and education, not politics, it is a topic that permeates every aspect of our lives. Our first steps were to educate the public on the hidden costs of warehouses and empower them to be civically engaged through political and non-political means. We often heard from people who were either not aware of how best to express themselves to their local government, or they were intimidated by the process. Letter writing campaigns made it easier for them to communicate with their elected officials, and some of those who sent letters later felt more confident to publicly speak at meetings. We found that Oprah was our most powerful tool, but there are many hurdles to overcome in order to use it successfully. The sheer number of documents to review can be overwhelming without the help we receive from volunteers. At least one Oprah request was met with resistance, and only litigation unfortunately resolved that matter, making it very important for us to know our rights to public information. We also found that social engagement was an important tool that not only provided a benefit to our community, but allowed us to reach a wider audience. Social media was an important medium to get our message out, but in-person events, when safe, were even more important. We held community events to stomp out lantern flies, host a haunted hayride, and gaze the stars with a guest astronomer while enjoying the beauty of historic farmland in Chesterfield. Naturally, any media attention for these events also helps to raise awareness of warehouse sprawl, but it has been challenging to garner media attention when local media is difficult to come by. We have seen some successes, however, in publications like Burlington County Times and the Daily Yonder. Lastly, we contacted many professionals to incorporate their expertise into our strategies. We spoke with traffic engineers, environmental and planning experts, legal advocates, and various state and regional agencies to gather as much information as possible. So I will leave you with some of the things that we've learned that we think will have an important impact on future planning. In our experience in Chesterfield, the municipal land use law has good intentions, but it can be misused by municipalities and developers. If Chesterfield's redevelopment plan is allowed to go forward, it will set a concerning precedent. The Old York Country Club, the property where the warehouse is proposed, was designated an area in need of rehabilitation with a claimed intent of rehabilitating the existing structures. Yet the proposed outcome is to redevelop the property without any rehabilitation. If a municipality can claim a property needs rehabilitation and then use the MLUL powers to wholesale change the property's use to something drastically different, warehouse sprawl in the state will accelerate to the detriment of our communities and the environment. The State Planning Commission guidelines, as were discussed earlier, released last year, suggested that Chesterfield's warehouse proposal should not have been approved. This is an over 1.1 million square foot warehouse. It is not located on a major roadway. It's connected on a rural county road. Unfortunately, the guidelines were easily ignored by the township, even as professionals pointed out the plan's inconsistencies with those guidelines. At least some of those guidelines need to be enforceable in order for warehouse sprawl to be brought under control. There was reference to potential legislation that is under consideration. And developers with significant financial interest in the outcome of zoning decisions have increased promotion of their projects in an attempt to counter growing pushback. In our situation, money was offered for recreational facilities in exchange for public support. Recent litigation in Wall Township also claims financial offers were made for favorable results. Limits and pay-to-play rules should be expanded to prevent financial practices from influencing planning decisions. And lastly, monitoring and researching litigation has been an important source for better understanding the tactics used by developers and municipalities. Web portals like the New Jersey Civil Case Search tool have been critical in our understanding of how other municipalities are handling specific developers. Using that tool, for example, to look up our pending litigation is a good way of seeing the arguments that are being made in writing. Other groups and municipalities should be closely watching the appeal of our redevelopment plan because it could indicate a lower bar to rezoning, a green light to potential fiscal zoning, and further warehouse sprawl. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brett, for sharing your experiences and what you've been going through with Save Old York or SOY. And we do have a ton of questions, feedback, comments for you in the chat, kind of about what you've been going through. And I'll start with just a couple and we'll go through. We have a little bit of time here for Q&A. So folks, again, if you want to keep putting those questions for Brett in the chat, and we will just kind of start to moderate them. Brett, something just to kind of get us started, we have a lot of folks on here who are interested in activism, campaigning, who have a lot of these same issues in their town. And so I wonder if you could just speak for a little bit about what was something unexpected that came up while you were fighting against this? Like, what's something you really wish that SOY knew in the beginning that you had to learn the hard way that might be helpful for some of the folks on this call?
Yeah, so I think that, maybe somewhat naively, we had anticipated that if we got enough folks together, uh, primarily from the town, I mean, obviously input from everyone is important, but sometimes small towns tend to focus on who has lived here the longest and, whose family has 4 generations that, have lived in the community and so forth. But ultimately, we tried to get as many people as possible to attend meetings and to give that feedback to the township. Um, and we were hopeful that they would listen to us. Unfortunately, we found that not to be the case. I think most importantly, it's critical to engage with the various committees, subcommittees, and boards within a town as early as possible. I'm not suggesting that anybody do anything unethical, but I do advocate for folks to engage when possible with people early. Don't rely solely on a meeting to voice your concerns, but to try to gather and speak out and communicate as much as possible with those individuals as early as possible, and if available, educate them on their rights. We were really surprised when we had the planning board meeting to consider the redevelopment plan that was proposed. Not a single planning board member asked a question. It was not a unanimous yes, but not a single person asked a question. And I think if we had maybe educated them a little bit earlier, if possible, on their rights, as opposed to them just solely relying on the guidance that they received that night, I think that would have been helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And I see a quick question in the chat. If you could clarify, they said that there was something, you mentioned a tool at the end or a website that you used. If you could just repeat that, someone was asking. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the New Jersey civil court case search tool. I'll grab the link and I'll put that in the chat. The reason why it seems kind of like a no-brainer, but what we found is there's a lot of information in these court documents. Some of it is accusatory, so you have to balance the fact that it's not necessarily that judgments have been made as of yet, but there's a lot of information about specific developers out there and the tactics that they use, and I think that's helpful for folks to be able to educate themselves from that perspective. So I'll put the link in the chat.
Perfect. Thanks, Brett. And we have the contact information from folks who registered, so we'll be sure to send these links and resources to folks afterwards as well. I know that's coming up in the chat. And you talked about your tactics and strategies in organizing, and we have some questions from folks about what you found the most effective and useful for communicating and to really try to start organizing people, right? So that you have so a warehouse came up in your town, right? And you knew you had interest. How did you communicate with people? How did you coordinate them? Somebody mentioned the app Nextdoor. Was that helpful? Or were there other, maybe local Facebook groups? You mentioned how Soy used social media. Can you talk a little bit about the best way for you all to share information and coordinate?
Yeah, so there were a few things that we did do. I created some posts in collaboration with Agnes and Lori with our group and other members as well. There's so many folks that contributed and it's difficult to name them all. In writing up updates for people throughout the process and posting those on Facebook, on Nextdoor, posting them directly on our website. Part of that was about controlling the narrative, not engaging too much in the back and forth in comments, and instead trying to take the lead in educating folks on the latest status through social media. We did our own mailers. I didn't actually touch on in the presentation. So we actually had a few mailer campaigns where we sent out specifics about the proposal, the warehouse proposal, and we engaged with folks who would not normally be on social media and sent them to our website. Having your own website is really critical because it gives people who don't have social media or don't want to engage a platform for them to see your message. Mm-hmm. Developer used similar tactics that we did, but at least we were somewhat ahead of the game there. And then I mentioned the platform Action Network. There are other platforms that are similar. So we started with change.org and we found success. People were signing the petition, but Action Network was really helpful because what we did is we had folks, we gave them a template and they could change the letter if they wanted. We didn't want to demand, or insist that they word it only our way, but it actually enabled them to hit a couple buttons and then that email would go off to the entire township committee or to the township, and it really gave them a quick tool to engage with the leadership in town, and doing things similarly for the planning board, for the Environmental Commission, other groups would also be really helpful.
Fantastic. Yeah. And actually, thinking about that, some folks had some questions in the chat about how your town worked. We know that in New Jersey, we have, 564 municipalities now, and all of them have different governments. So I think it's really key for towns to know how their government works. Do you have a zoning and a planning board? Do you have a mixed land use board? So someone did ask if you could talk a little bit about that structure and how you learned and how you navigated that. Because theoretically, right, your planning board should be independent of your town council, although most of them have some sitting committee men on the town council. So we just had some questions, kind of how you started to navigate that space.
Yeah, so the way that the process worked for us, so we have a joint board. The planning board is both planning and zoning. We just call it the planning board in our town, but it is joint. So the way the process typically works, at least in our case with the municipal land use law and the redevelopment statute. So the township committee directed the planning board to conduct a study on the property initially back in 2020, looking to see if it could be designated as an area needed rehabilitation. They conducted the study. They said, yes, we think it meets the criteria. It went back to the township committee. After that point, the township committee did hear very briefly from, we have an environmental commission. We have a historic preservation commission for our historic district in town. These subcommittees also gave very brief statements to the township committee, but there wasn't a lot of advocacy early on. Unfortunately, after the redevelopment plan was adopted, we're actually now seeing our historic preservation commission seems to be much more concerned with the black house that's as it's titled on the property, because the developer is proposing moving that either into what is currently a flood zone or off of the property entirely. So there's, but yeah, so it's township committee and our planning board, again, joint, and then we had the environmental commission, the historic preservation commission, et cetera, that got involved.
Great, thank you. And I do just want to clarify something I said in the chat. So thanks, Brett, if you don't mind. I meant they're an independent voting body, but as a lot of folks have pointed out, they appointed by the town council too. So if you're a member of a body, you're appointed by the town council, but the board is a separate entity from the township committee, if that makes sense.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, and I didn't touch on that. So 2 of our committee members sit on our planning board as well. One of them is always the mayor or the mayor's designee. And then the other is someone appointed by the committee to be on the planning board. Then we have obviously the volunteers, but they are appointed by the township committee as well. So that does add some complexity because last year we had a different majority on our township committee than we do this year. And so you can see a difference in the folks, potentially that are appointed to the planning board and what their interests might be. Are they potentially more, are they more in support of the views of the people who previously appointed them? You would hope that would be independent. But yeah, they are appointed by the township committee.
Yes, thanks, Brett, and thanks to folks in the chat for highlighting that clarification as well. I do see a question coming in that I think a lot of folks here have alluded to, is that sometimes, we try to be as proactive as we possibly can, but sometimes you end up a little bit behind the 8 ball, it seems, when something's already come in an application. And so I think, unless I'm mistaken, that was a little bit of the experience in Chesterfield. So can you talk a little bit about what kind of actions folks can take if there is a plan already in the works and they find out it's conditionally approved? Should they still go through with an appeal? What can they do? And kind of who did you start filing with when you all started and engaging in your fight? And you mentioned some legal action. Where did you go? Who did you take that to?
Yeah, so one of the things that might be a little bit unique in Chesterfield as opposed to some other towns is that this property was previously zoned agricultural. And so it required actual rezoning of the property to a land use that was not, that did not exist anywhere else in Chesterfield. We didn't have warehousing or light industrial anywhere else in the community that would have permitted this type of construction. And so it required the municipal land use law in this area needed rehabilitation ultimately to change the zoning of that property. So what we did is we, as soon as we heard about this project, so this We started hearing about it mostly in 2021. We immediately went and spent a little bit of time, a little bit of money, of course, everything costs money, but a little bit of money working with a professional planner who was wholly separate from the township, and started consulting on what was the process that we should expect. Because when we ask questions in the planning board and township committee meetings, they were going to give us the bare minimum answer. They weren't going to obviously walk us through the process. So that was important for us, because then we fully understood what were our options. We had already missed the opportunity to appeal the rehabilitation designation. As I mentioned, it happened during the beginning of COVID. Nobody really realized it happened. We missed the appeal period. As we were working up towards the redevelopment plan adoption, and we were pretty confident, unfortunately, that they were going to ignore the community majority and adopt it, we were already consulting with the attorney and the planner on what were our next steps. So we knew that we had a 45-day appeal period once the plan was adopted to appeal that. But again, in our situation, because there was a rezoning there was a rezoning factor. The situation is a little bit different, because it's not like it was by right, where they already had the permitted land use and they were just looking for site plan approval. One of the other things I didn't touch on just quickly, I want to mention also, is a lot of engagement with the DEP. So we are very closely monitoring the applications to the DEP. We're working with the neighbors of this property in the sense that, we want to make sure we watch for when they get notifications of applications going before the DEP. And that has been a critical part of our process as well. So even in the event that litigation is unsuccessful, we're still trying to push hard on the DEP side, as well as the county side in our instance, because there is a county road involved, to try and push back on that as well. But unfortunately, it's mostly about trying to work with groups to get professionals involved as soon as possible, objective third-party professionals as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I know we have about a few more minutes, 5 more minutes for questions. And so if you're comfortable, Brad, at the end, I'll put contact information for how they can see what Save Old York has been doing to learn more. Because I know, as we said from other presentations, we could be here all night talking about this. But one of the questions that came up that I think is interesting and a fair point and open to discussion is, well, what is the alternative, right? Where can we put warehouses, and how do we respond to a lot of that? And so I think, at least from New Jersey LCV's perspective, we've talked about, redevelopment of brownfields or redevelopment of certain, particular areas that are away from residential, away from impacted users. A lot of, I'm not sure exactly who asked that question, but that's a lot of what the warehouse siting guidance gets into, that our speakers from the Department of State had shared earlier, is what does make sense. And the other thing, because at the end of the day, right, everyone does shop online. And so we know that warehouses are going to continue to exist. But I think what's really key and really important for us as advocates is to understand that not all warehouses are created equal. And not all warehouses make sense in certain areas. For example, we always want to protect prime farmland. We want to protect our wetlands, areas that are susceptible to stormwater. You mentioned that in your presentation, Brett, as concerns in Chesterfield. So I would really encourage folks to look at their communities, find out what your master plan says, what your zoning ordinance says, and even find out, has your zoning board defined warehouse or at all as an industrial use? Because unfortunately, I know someone else asked in the chat, can a community just say, no, we don't want any of this? And if a community takes an action like that, they're really opening themselves up to legal challenges. But what a community can do is be very specific and deliberative in their zoning ordinance. And they can define a last mile fulfillment center versus a large scale industrial warehouse. I know Matt, our presenter earlier, talked a little bit about the different kind of warehouses. A community can define those in their zoning ordinances, and it gives, kind of that introduction to what we will allow where and what we won't allow where. But if you don't define it at all in your zoning ordinance and it just says industrial, as too many of us have learned, developers will be happy to define that for you. So I do wonder, Brett, a couple more questions coming in. One thing I wanted to ask, and then we'll go into kind of how you found your professionals, because that's been a question too. Another thing I just want to ask you, if you can touch on briefly how you all used the role of media, how you were able to get attention to it, articles, interest. Is that something you found helpful? Could you get the narrative out that way? And if so, how did you do that?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, just to make sure I missed, so there was that a two-part, did I hear the question about professionals as well?
Yeah, I think
Or do you
that's
want me to?
what I wanted to go into. Sorry, I just didn't want to forget because I'm seeing the questions kind of keep rolling
Yeah,
in.
yeah.
Whichever
Yeah,
one
I'll
you
answer
want to
the
start
media
with
question
first.
first. Yeah, I'll answer the media question first. We've struggled in getting media attention for this. I think the fact that the response that we've heard most times is this is a big issue, but one town's issue is not big enough. And what they're really looking to do is put together a story that talks about multiple towns, but they're not necessarily, reaching out to those groups directly, and soliciting those questions themselves. So we've struggled a bit in terms of getting media attention for this. One of the publications I mentioned, Daily Yonder, is a smaller publication. It focuses on rural small town life. As I mentioned, Chesterfield is approximately 9,000 residents. 75% plus of our farmland is preserved, and so we got some attention there, and that helped. But frankly, I think the most impactful thing to do is to find events that garner media attention more than anything. When we had critical milestones, or if we ourselves hosted events that we could go out and put press releases out for, I think that was what grabbed more attention than just kind of, just arbitrarily reaching out to media contacts and trying to get their attention. Also looking for instances where they publicize some article and trying to reach out to them immediately after, as the attention is still there, helped a little bit. But we did struggle. I don't have, unfortunately, great answers for that particular issue, but it's also difficult because there's very little local media. There's some more regional, but yeah.
Yeah, definitely a learning process. And I do want to flag some
Yeah.
folks that said for social media, their experience has kind of gone both ways, that sometimes you can kind of see the trolling or the opposition might try to seize on social media. So something for folks to just be aware of.
Yeah.
And if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about how, some folks are highlighting Tap Into or Patch, local places like that where you can get it. And if you can, maybe we have time for a couple, maybe one or two more questions, one of which being if you can talk a little bit about your experience with your professionals and how you found them.
Yeah, so I mentioned the professional planner and the attorney, and obviously those resources cost money. But beyond that, we were looking at other towns and looking at the issues that they were running into, and we actually found an incredible network of individuals who have experience working through these challenges. We met individuals who worked with wastewater treatment. We found individuals who formerly worked for the New Jersey Department of Transportation. And it was through that networking that we were able to discuss some of these issues with those professionals. It really helped us to garner ideas, even if they couldn't necessarily affect change directly. And frankly, it was mostly networking. One of the things that I'd be happy to do, so our website, saveoldyork.org, has a contact form, so people are welcome to reach out to us if you have a particular type of professional that you're trying to look for. I can't guarantee that I can connect everyone with that type of professional, but I think that's one way in which we can work together and try to speak to those individuals. So we found some success there. It was really interesting as we were seeing the project and the application progress. We were seeing them do test well sites, testing wells on the property. And we actually had someone who works in water management who was looking at that and saying, those images, at least, without any professional, in-person review, those images were showing that water table is really high. That water is right below the surface. That's really concerning. And that spurred us to look more into that and start to add that, for example, to our comments to the DEP, our concerns. So those are some of the ways that we engaged with those professionals without, incurring professional fees.
Thank you so much. And I know we're wrapping up here, but we could be talking all night. So we just want to thank you, Brett. And again, I know folks still have questions. We weren't able to get to everybody. Can you just let folks know again how you can contact them? And then if you wouldn't mind in the chat, just dropping that resource you had mentioned earlier on the civil court system.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So again, our website is saveoldyork.org. There are other websites of local groups. We would love to connect with others, and we'll definitely connect folks where we can. And I'll definitely put that link in the chat for the court search tool.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, Brett. And like we said, we could be talking all night. Yes, that the Save Old York website was also dropped in the chat. I see people asking for that. It's saveoldyork.org. I'll put it in the chat again here. There's a contact form on there, and you can get in touch with Brett. And thank you, Brett, for sharing all of your experience, your advice, your guidance with someone who's kind of, been out there doing the work on the ground. So we really appreciate hearing from you.
Yes, thank you, Allison. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thanks, Brett. That was great information. And so we're wrapping up our evening already. So we're just going to share, we did get that survey link live again. So I apologize again for the little bit of technical snafu we had. So if folks want to, if our LCV folks, New Jersey LCV folks could put that in the chat again, we'll give that another couple minutes for folks to do the warehouse webinar survey. And then we'll give that warehouse webinar survey about a minute. And as I am talking about that, like I said, we're wrapping up. I do want to highlight from folks, we heard tonight about the guidance that the states put out. We heard from someone about some of the experiences they're having on the local level. This is not the only conversation that we want to have with you all on warehouses. As you can see, even on, an hour and a half, we ran out of time to get to all the questions. Something that I saw folks bring up a lot that I'm going to ask someone from my team to put in the chat as I put them up is they talked about the need for legislation. So New Jersey LCV, we're not only a 501c3, we're also a 501c4. So we do work on legislation. We were invited to testify before the assembly on some of the warehouse legislation that is, that has been proposed. Nothing has moved all the way through the legislature yet, but that's where some of that advocacy comes from folks like you. When our elected officials hear that these issues are very important to you, when they get, dozens of emails saying, we want to see you vote yes on these bills, that's how advocacy and legislative lobbying works. It's from folks like you. And so we'll be sure to continue to keep in touch with all of you as we move forward through this process. But some of that legislation that's out there or has been proposed right now, and I'll just ask if folks can put these, from my team, can put these bill numbers in the chat so folks can look them up and follow along. One is Senate Bill 3356, which requires a planning board reexamination report to set forth recommendations for the siting of warehouses consistent with the guidance that we heard about earlier tonight. A4475, A means assembly, and then that's just the bill number, and they're putting those in the chat as we speak. A4475 requires warehouse proposals above a certain size must be reviewed at the county level. Assembly 4950 requires the State Planning Commission to adopt a model ordinance for siting warehouses that then municipalities could use. And I think that's all of them. I was about to repeat myself with the next Senate bill, which the first one I said was Senate Bill 3356. So there are some legislation in the works, but again, that requires advocacy from folks to continue to keep it moving. And we continue to do that work. Many of our partners and co-sponsors on this event continue to do that work as well. So I just want to thank our co-sponsors again this evening. That's New Jersey Future, the Association of New Jersey Environmental Commissions, the New Jersey Highlands Coalition, the Highlands Preservation Alliance, Camden Community Partnership, Food and Water Watch, the Atlantic Climate Justice Alliance, and the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. And we hope you're able to take what you learned this evening from Donna and Matt from the Department of State, and we thank them, and we thank Brett as well for sharing Save Old York's experiences. We hope you're able to take all this information back to your local planning and zoning boards and to use them for your organizing efforts. We are always available to answer more questions, and you can reach us at information@ information@njlcv.org. That's information@njlcv.org. We would also say that if you are interested in learning more about what we're doing around warehouses, we would ask that you join our activist program. We're going to put that link in the chat right now to get direct messages from us to learn more about what kind of resources we can offer and help for our activism program and to help join the conservation fight. So I will just ask if it's not there already, if one of our team can put the link to our activist program. I see our email is in there as well. And there it is. That's our link to how to join our activist program and volunteer to learn more about warehouses and the other issues and conservation efforts that we take part in. So we would really encourage you to join that. Like we said, there's a lot of interest in warehouses, so this is definitely not going to be the last that you hear from us on it. But again, thank you to all of our speakers, our presenters, our co-sponsors, and specifically thank you to all of you for hanging in there with us for this entire presentation. And so please stay tuned to our mailing list and our information for the future to learn about next steps for some of our work on warehouses. So thank you all, and please enjoy the rest of your evening.